Good morning. I'm Kevin Butler, Vice President of Product and Marketing here at Vertical Communications, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion of essential tips for a successful migration to cloud communications. We've got a lot of content we're going to go through today, and hopefully it's very worthwhile for you. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. To start off, I'll mention that we definitely want your feedback and insight. What do you really want to know about? What questions you have? And so rather than waiting till the question and answer period and trying to remember, if you're like me and getting older, that maybe not be the easiest thing to remember what the question was. You can immediately go into your interface. If you put your mouse near the bottom, you should see this bar pops up just like I'm showing you on the screen. You can press the meeting chat button there, as some of you have already found, and that will pop up a chat window where you can type in your question. We'll go through all those questions at the end and make sure that everything that you were asked about, everything that you're interested in, are addressed. So make sure you go through that process and just ask questions along the way, and we'll make sure and cover them all before we get out of here today. So we're going to talk about 10 different things that will really help your cloud migration process be improved. First, we're going to make sure that the cloud actually makes sense for you and go through a last sort of safety check as you're making the cloud migration process to say, is this okay? We'll go through how to make sure your network is ready for a cloud migration and what things that you should be looking at. We'll make sure you're understanding the real requirements for cloud and how to make sure that you get cloud working the right way for you. We will also talk about eliminating silos throughout the whole process and making sure that you've got everything connected together. We will then talk about choosing the right tools for the job. And what I mean by that is, which devices should you be using? What are the techniques that you should be really working with that? We will also talk about making sure that you've got a worry-free cutover, because you don't want to spend time being frustrated and stressed out as you cut over. And so we want to talk to you about tips and tricks that we've learned over our years to do that. Then how do you keep all of this secure? How do you make sure that the security is there? And finally, service. Service being the thing that's going to keep you happy over the years. So what should you be looking for, and what will make sure that you have the best possible service for your cloud communications? And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about disaster planning after that, which can never be ignored and should always be part of your preparation and process. In addition to all of this, we'll spend some time answering any questions that you've got and any concerns that you've got. We'll make sure that we address as well. So that's a full plate. We're going to have a lot more than just these. Some of these have like 20 or 30 tips built into them. So trust me, you're going to get your money's worth. There's a lot more than 10 tips going on here. But let's start out by making sure that cloud actually makes sense. Now, we understand why everyone's interested in cloud and why it's an exciting concept. Over the last year, we've had the unprecedented shift of moving so many workers home, of this becoming an massive culture shift. And then this was propelled a huge amount of interest in cloud and a huge amount of interest in people in moving into the cloud space. And that has continued as we're starting to look at transitioning. People are still really interested in transitioning to the cloud. So there's no doubt there's good reasons for everybody to be thinking, well, maybe I should be doing this. But let's do a quick safety check to make sure that this is the right choice for you. This is the right place to be. So cloud will really fit if you meet these 6 categories. You don't have to meet all of them, but there are things to think about. First, if from a capital perspective, you're really looking at preferring OpEx expenditures, you would rather have an ongoing monthly service payment rather than doing a major capital outlay. Well, obviously, cloud is a much better fit there. There are ways to do premise-based solutions in a OpEx environment, but it's much easier. Cloud just fits this model perfectly. The next one to think about is if you need the latest technology, if you want to be on the cutting edge, if your organization needs the features as soon as they come out, cloud is always updating and always changing. We see with most of our cloud providers that they're making feature changes on a monthly basis, if not even faster. And that leads to the next one, which is flexibility to add capabilities. It may be that you don't need something major like contact center or smart chatbots or other capabilities when you start out. But if you need to be able to quickly add those as your company evolves and expands, then cloud really is the way to go, because it's very easy. It's basically a click of the button to get those added in. And that applies also to scaling. If you're in a high growth environment, your company is expanding rapidly, maybe you're a startup that's going from 2 to 1,000 in a very, very fast pace, then cloud is a great way to add users quickly and easily and makes it much, much simpler. So that's another reason why cloud really makes a lot of sense for you. And then if you're looking at reallocating IT resources, you may want to put them on higher value projects than administration and maintenance of systems. Cloud really fits that model because the basic model is you're offsetting all of that our infrastructure maintenance and monitoring off to the cloud service provider. And so this allows you to take those very valuable high touch IT resources and point them at projects that can have more value for the company. And then, of course, the biggie, the one that we've all been dealing with for more than a year now, which is enabling remote work. Cloud works particularly well for remote work for the simple reason that every single user, whether they're in your office, at home, or at a Starbucks, are all cloud users. They're all remote all the time. So it just makes sense that cloud's going to do really well for remote. Just one quick anecdote from Vertical's history over the last year. During the first half of last year, we spent a large amount of time making sure that all of our customers could move their workforces seamlessly home. And we spent a lot of effort making sure their systems could do this and were optimized. But I have to admit, I called several of our cloud customers and there was no effort there. Literally, one of them told us, we just took our 500 workers, told them to go home, they all logged in, and they were up and working because it didn't really make any difference. And that's why remote work with cloud can be such a powerful factor. So what's the flip side of this? Why would you not want to have cloud? Well, cloud may not be a fit if you prefer to do a major capital outlay, you want to have an asset that you amortize over time. If that's where your focus is from a financial planning perspective, then cloud's not the situation because there's just no way to deliver it that way. Also, if you need more deliberate change, if your company's more conservative about technology change, if you say, hey, look, we get the features we want and then we want to stay there, then cloud probably isn't the product. Because one of those things about cloud is it is going to move forward. There is no way to say, hey, look, I like version 3.0. I want to stay on version 3.0. You might be able to delay the inevitable, but you're going to move forward because the cloud infrastructure is going to move to the newest version. And that's going to keep on happening no matter what. Another reason why cloud might not be a fit is if in your business model you have a need to maintain local data ownership. Now note, this is not data ownership. Most cloud vendors, the competent ones, will be able to provide you with reassurances that your data is segregated, encrypted, and separated so that you can contain and own it and take it with you when you go. But local data ownership is more about having local servers that you have under your physical control. And if you have regulatory requirements or reasons in your business model, you may want to be looking at a premises solution still. Along with that, there may be the fact that you have a big existing investment going on. You may have a bunch of existing IP already wrapped up in your existing investment. You may have done customizations, integrations to other software, custom software that hooks into your existing communications, or maybe it's just you have a lot of the stuff. One of our customers has 10,000 locations that each have a premises-based phone system today. For them, moving to cloud is a very difficult and complicated experience because they're maintaining a very, very large physical plant of equipment, and just taking it all out and moving it, what seems like, oh, that should be much easier. But it's hard to first give up that investment, which they're constantly upgrading and updating. And second, figuring out the best way to do that seamlessly is very difficult. And that's something Vertical's been working with them on. So it could be that you just have bought a system in the last couple of years. You have a lot tied up in the existing workflows. You've done some customizations. These may be reasons not to go there. And another one is that you may have staff that are always on site. So you may still have retail staff. You might be doing a storefront. You might have warehouse staff or somebody else who has to be at a location. A manufacturing facility is another example. In these cases, if internal communication within the site is the most important thing going on, it may make more sense to have a premises-based system still there so that those people can communicate at their location, or still with the outside world. Because the other item to look at is that you may have a location that has poor or non-existent network connectivity. I know it's hard to believe. We spend so much time on the internet nowadays, but there's huge swaths of the United States that are still without decent internet service. And so it may be that you just don't have a location that has a great connection. So all of these are reasons why you might not want to do cloud, and it might not work for you. But if these don't apply, or maybe some of them apply, you can also talk to Vertical about the concept of hybrid solutions or premises solutions. We can help you with all of those. But if you're saying after all of this, yeah, no, cloud still applies, let's keep on moving on with our tips. So let's talk next about the network. The network is the most important thing that you're possibly going to have for your cloud installation. It's going to choose whether or not you succeed or fail. Now, in preparing this list of tips and tricks, we didn't just say, hey, let's think of what Kevin thinks about this. We went out to a lot of different experts in the industry and got their opinion. One of them was Denise Monroe. Denise is a great telecom consultant. She's the principal at CRG Telecom. And her primary tip was to make sure your data network is ready to support cloud. It's going to be the make or break to this whole process, and went through a bunch of different things. So let's listen to Denise and go through some of those. And first, real quick, let's back up what Denise is saying to understand voice and video are the most demanding cloud apps out there. And that's why your network is so important. There can be huge websites that do massive amounts of traffic, but they don't really have problems on the web. They can simply retransmit their content. If there's a network problem, if there's a delay, if the content's not going through quickly, it can be a bad customer experience, but they're not down. Even streaming services like Netflix and YouTube can buffer and do other tricks because their content is being streamed out in one direction. On the other hand, real-time voice and video needs good network conditions at all times to work. If there's any problem right now hearing me, or if the slides are being delayed the slightest bit, that may be because you have a last mile issue right now with your network that might be a problem. So you're dealing with the most demanding of the most demanding, the hardest thing to get right. And so you need to look at everything from the bottom on up. So let's do that real quick. Let's start at the very bottom, which is wiring. If you're going to have physical phones, you're going to need network cabling. Now, Wi-Fi is an option. We'll talk about Wi-Fi in a minute. Hold on to that thought. We'll get there. But if you're going to have physical phones, you need to make sure that you have network cabling that is called Cat5 or Cat6 to the phone location. If you have an older phone system today, that might not be the case. You might have what's called Cat3 cabling, and that won't work at all. So you need to make sure that you've got the right cabling here. Now, if you already have a computer at the location, then you should be good, because most phones will have what's called a pass-through port on them. You can see the back of one of our phones here with an inbound network port that you plug the cable from the wall, and then you can plug an outbound cable and plug that directly into the computer. So as long as you have one network connection for a location, you're good. Now, ideally, you could have two. There's some real advantages to doing it that way. Our network experts could talk to you about that, but really, at minimum, you've got to have the one connection in every location. So these then hook into your network switches as we move up the chain. And the first question is, do they support power over Ethernet? Now, what is PoE? It's the capability to actually provide electrical power down the network connection. This means you can plug your phone in and it immediately powers up. It's got network connectivity and it will work. If you don't have this, you can still plug the phone to the wall, but now you don't just need a network jack, you need a phone plug for every single phone. And that's going to have an increased level of complexity. Another issue, if you don't have PoE on your network switch, is that you're going to have an issue with having the ability to not do the best backup that you possibly could. Because with a power over Ethernet switch, it becomes very simple. You can plug the switch into a battery backup, and then in a disaster situation, all of your phones are powered just by the one central battery backup. Rather than if you plug them in at the individual phone, you need to have battery backups at every single phone. And that's just a lot more complicated and difficult. So power over Ethernet is not absolutely necessary, but it's one of those really good to have things. What is absolutely necessary is that your switches support what we call quality of service prioritization, or QoS. So QoS is the way that we make sure that we're prioritizing the right things. When we do a phone call, we say, hey, the phone call is more important than that software download. So make sure that the phone call goes first. It also says things like, make sure that, hey, you may be browsing the web, but that web traffic isn't as important as my video conference that I'm on right now. So QoS needs to be supported down to your switches. And here's the other key part. We're seeing that a lot of switches out there that are delivered for security reasons, and there are good reasons for this, they have QoS prioritization, but it's turned off on the switch ports by default. So you need to go into the console of the switch and turn them on for all the ports that are going to be either connected up using the soft phones or using your hard phones, you need to make sure that those ports are turned on QoS. That's all you need to do, because you're going to have industry standards for QoS. You shouldn't need to set up a bunch of other prioritization at that point. It should just be set up. You've got to make sure it's on and that the switches support it. Another quick thing to look at is if you have more than one switch, which almost any customer is going to have if they have an organization that's larger than, say, 20 or so people. If they have multiple switches, you want to make sure that the trunk ports, in other words, the connections between switches, are what we call gigabit Ethernet. That means that they're high capacity. They do 1,000 megabits per second. And because they're taking all the traffic from all those ports and they're sending it on to the next one, you want to make sure they're high capacity. Now, they could be more than that, and that's even better. But at least at the minimum, they need to be a gigabit connection between switches. And then the final thing that we suggest to look at is DHCP. DHCP, don't worry too much about all the ins and outs of this, but what it basically means is DHCP capabilities allow you to just plug something in and it configures itself. It gets all the information from the DHCP server that tells it, here's all the information you need to know. One of the problems that we see is if you have an existing voice over IP solution and you move to cloud, that existing solution may be using a couple of DHCP settings, most commonly option 66 or option 160, to provide configuration for themselves. And so if you don't turn those off, you might find that your new cloud phone is getting configured to work with your old system. And that can cause problems. Probably won't work, probably cause more issues than you'd like. So these are just a few of the things to look at on the network switch side. But then from the network switch, of course, we're then going out to the router, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But remember, we said I'd come to Wi-Fi. Before we get out to the router and the internet, let's talk about Wi-Fi. Lots of offices are using Wi-Fi now, and of course, this is even more relevant as people are working at home. They almost certainly are using Wi-Fi in their house. Most people aren't me, who the first thing I did when I moved into this house was wired the whole place with Cat6 networking cable, because I'm just that guy. So your mobile soft phones that you should provide from your cloud vendor should just work with Wi-Fi. They're already connecting. You know how to hook up your phone to the Wi-Fi. The mobile soft phone will use it. Your PC soft phone should work that way too. If you actually want to use hard phones, it's going to be a little bit harder. And we're going to talk to you about how you can do that a little later on when we talk about choosing devices. But it is possible. But the key point to know is Wi-Fi and using voice or video over it can be difficult. If you're doing it at home, there's just you and your family, it's probably okay. But if you start getting a lot of users like in an office, you're going to run into problems. And one of the key reasons why is Wi-Fi is what's called a single collision domain. Now, you don't need to really remember this, but what it means is that if you have multiple users, they're all going to work at the speed of the slowest user. So if you have somebody who's just at the edge of your Wi-Fi access, or somebody who's got a big piece of steel between them and the Wi-Fi, and their signal is really struggling, that can make everybody else on the Wi-Fi point struggle. So this can be a real problem. So there are some technologies that help with that. There's some things that can minimize that. And this is something that a really good vendor like Vertical can help you with and can make sure that you've got a solution there. But don't just take for granted that you can just hook everything up on your Wi-Fi and it'll all work. This is something you're going to have to spend some time on and be aware of, testing and making sure it works. Not just, hey, am I connected to Wi-Fi? Hey, do I have good signal strength? But does voice and video actually work well over it is a major concern. So now we've gotten all of our network connections, and now the next thing they need to do is hit the cloud, because all of these devices you've got that are going to be your cloud communications devices, they have to hit the cloud. They have to go out, and that means they have to go out your internet connection. So there's a number of things to consider here. First is your internet quality. Do you have enough bandwidth? Now, the average phone call is going to take somewhere around 90 to 100K per second. So you need to make sure that, hey, look, I could have 20 phone calls. That means 20 times 100. You're looking at more if you're looking at video, which could be 200 to 300K per second. So you've got to look at how many simultaneous video calls you have. But there are many other very important things as well. We talk about terms like latency and jitter, and I'm not going to get into all the details of these, but you need to be thinking about how good is my internet connection, and not just how much bandwidth do I have, but how good is the quality of it as a whole. In addition, you need to look at your router setup. Is the security turned up so tight that you can't even make a connection? Especially outbound traffic restrictions are a problem here. But you need to make sure that your router isn't set up so nothing can get through. A really important part of this is what we call ALG, or application layer gateways. This was a capability to try and make things like this easier, but all I've ever seen is make things not work. So having an ALG capability, which are in most routers turned on, will almost always cause cloud communications to fail and your phone not to work. So that's something to get turned off. And then you have to think about reliability. Do you want a private connection? Do you maybe want to say, hey, look, this is so important that I want to have a private MPLS connection all the way back to my cloud vendor? Do they support that? Do I want to have it managed so I have something automatically checking and optimizing the connection through a technology like SD-WAN? Do I want to have multiple connections? If you have a large office that you're going to have a bunch of people in using the service, then probably you do want to have a couple of connections, because cloud is absolutely crucial to having any communications at all. So you can have multiple connections going out. Now, these could be, hey, I have a really high-end connection, and then I have a cheap little cable connection that's my backup. And then your managed connectivity with SD-WAN can bring the two together. The other thing you want to think about is you don't get two internet connections that are the same. Hey, look, these are the exact same type of connection. I'm just going to get two of them. Doesn't help you much. If you're going to do multiple connections, you want to have what we call diverse networks. So maybe you have a cellular connection and you have a cable connection. Maybe you have fiber to the location and then you have a connection from your phone company. It depends on what is going on there. You just want to make sure that you have diverse connections. Now, wow, I just threw a ton of stuff at you, not just the wiring and the network switches, but just this slide alone. You might be a little freaked out and going, Kevin, you just haven't given me enough to do all this. Well, the first thing I'll tell you is we have deeper webinars on all of the tips that I'm giving you today, and we'll tell you at the end how to get to that information. But we have webinars and articles that can go into all this. But the real answer to that is that you're going to need a network assessment. Your vendor should provide you a network assessment. Once again, we go to one of our experts, and Tim Larson is our vertical VP of solutions, who's been doing this for decades. And his main tip was you've got to have a quality network assessment. It's got to happen early. You've got to make sure you thoroughly check everything. And then you should have network experts from your vendor to provide remediation, that they can tell you how to fix it, right? So they need to be providing you a network assessment tool that is custom and targeted for the product that you're going to be using. There's an example on the screen there that goes through and checks all the things that have been determined to be problems before. It should be readable by you, the customer. You shouldn't have to go to somebody like us or the cloud provider to say, oh, they're the only ones who can actually tell what's going on. You need to have a readable copy of the stuff. And you can run it over once, or it can be set to run over time. And all of this should just be provided. This should be part of the service. So somebody says, oh, yeah, we can do that, but there's X additional cost. I would run away from that very quickly. And then there needs to be network experts that can help you interpret this and figure out, okay, how do we fix this? Now, how do we fix this may have additional cost to it, but the network assessment itself and the recommendations on what to do, that should just be all included with the solution. If you don't have that, you have no way of being able to know that you've got everything right. I mean, you can go back through my slides, you can look at our additional webinars, but I would really suggest that you need to have this, because any competent professional is going to say, I got to go test before I can tell you what the answers are. So the next point is that once you're done and the system's in and everything, you've still got to monitor all this. You've got to have something that's checking, because just because you fix it the first time doesn't mean it's going to stay fixed. Things change, problems develop. You want to have something that will provide you monitoring of the actual call quality of all your voice and video calls to make sure there are no problems, so that you can go look and see if there are issues. And you want to have a team behind that that's going to provide proactive effort to say, oh yeah, hey, there's a problem. We're going to go fix it by doing this. Because once again, this is about reduced IT resources. That's one of the reasons why we went to cloud, right? We saw that earlier. To do that, we need to make sure that the vendor is providing you with people automatically monitoring everything, so you don't have to think about it as much. So ongoing monitoring, being able to have access to the information yourself, as well as automatic monitoring by the cloud provider, these are absolutely critical things that must be part of the solution. All right, so we got the network ready. The next thing to do is understand what your real requirements are. What are you really trying to achieve? And this suggestion came from Bill Hutchison, as an enterprise solutions engineer who's worked for almost every single cloud vendor that is out there on the marketplace today. And Bill's comment was that you need to stop thinking about just replicating your existing system and moving it into the cloud, and think about what can you not do now? What would you like to be able to do? Dream big is basically Bill's point here. And so you don't want to duplicate the past. You don't just want to make it work exactly the way it did before. You want to imagine a brighter future, a new place where things work better. One of the biggest problems that we see when putting in cloud is we have people just tell us, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? We've always done it this way and we can't change. You need to be thinking about what's the ideal way? How can we really make this work better? And how can we improve it so that we have a much better product? Here's a couple steps to do that. First, talk to everybody. Talk to your frontline staff, who are the people who are on the phone all the day with customers. Talk to the back of the house, the people in the warehouses, manufacturing, whatever, who don't do it as much, but still may have needs and very likely don't have needs that are addressed because they're not at the front line. Of course, engage all your leadership and management. Find out what they think needs to be done here and gather them into the process. And don't forget, possibly the most important of all, go talk to your customers. Ask them what their problems are today. Ask them what they would like to see and what their ideals are. Particularly ask what doesn't work today, what's broken, what frustrates you, and what means that you can't get through today. And consider your existing system probably isn't ideal. Much of what you've got today is probably workarounds, things you've had to change direction and fix and go this way and go that way just because the system had limitations or it didn't work for you. You want to have the ideal, the straight line, and that's something that cloud offers you the potential when you change. Your end goal of all this should be the best possible customer experience that you can deliver, and that requires thinking big and not duplicating the past. And don't worry, once again, you've got somebody who can help you with this. Your vendor should be actively helping you. In our case, our expert solution engineers will sit down and help you realize, hey, here's the design that will best do what we need it to do. Not just doing exactly what we used to do, but here's the way it should work going forward. And that's what you should be looking for. So you're realizing the best design, you're going to find what you really need rather than just saying, hey, here's how the system worked before. So next, let's talk about product silos. And the problem here really is simple. People have a lot of different solutions. We see people using some products for chat, video. They may have a separate contact center. They may still be using their own personal cell phones for texting back and forth with clients. And then voice may be a whole separate thing. And the problem when you have all these different products going in different directions is there isn't one coherent view of the customer. You have all these different places where communication are, management can't see what the total customer experience is, the end user doesn't even know how all the ways they've contacted them. So one of the things that we recommend is to focus on a single communications platform that can provide you a voice, that can provide you video, texting, to provide you support calls, contact center, all of those capabilities all together in one single reporting picture so that you can see the customer experience in one location. This is crucial to having success. If you don't have this, you're really not getting the value of the term is unified communications. If it's still shattered amongst all these different pieces, you've got a problem. Now, there are other good reasons to go with a single communications platform and break out of those silos. Let me give you an example that's real in the industry. RingCentral is one of the leaders in the space, and they used another leader in the video space, Zoom, to provide what they called RingCentral meetings. They partnered together. This worked great for a number of years and was like best of breed. We have one of the best in the voice side, we have one of the best in the video side, and they're offering me the best together. But they're different companies with different competing goals, and that's become really evident in the last year because Zoom has launched a product called Zoom Phone, which directly competes with what RingCentral does. And so RingCentral, either in defense or as an aggressive move, produced RingCentral Video. This is a replacement for RingCentral Meetings, which replaces Zoom and gets rid of it. And the end result of this is Zoom is currently suing RingCentral, leading end customers to have product uncertainty. Zoom has threatened repeatedly to just completely cut off the feature for existing customers that are still using the RingCentral Zoom combination. Ring is trying to force customers as quickly as possible off of the Zoom platform and onto their new platform. Customers aren't getting what they expected. It's a whole changing environment. This can be nothing but bad. And this is the problem when you have different vendors that you're all trying to stick together. Even when they are working together and partnering, you can still end up situations like this. If they're not already partnering together, it can be even worse. So that's a cautionary tale of why you look at, hey, look, I have different parts and I bring them together, doesn't provide you the best unified communication solution. Another thing to look at is the ease of use. Do you have one single coherent interface that you can go and access, whether I need to call a customer or talk to somebody in the organization or just chat with a partner? Do I have one place to do all of this? Can I search across all the various conversations and see all of that information together? And can I avoid the problems that we just saw of competing services that end up with competing goals? All of this with simplified management so that when you do need to administer the whole system, you're administering all of it in one place with one solution rather than having to go in, oh, here's my chat interface, here's my voice or video interface. That's not the value of unified communications at all. So one of the things to make a successful cloud migration is to make sure you have the right platform, which is a single platform for all of the different communication sources. Hopefully that makes sense. So the next thing we'll talk about is choosing the right tools to work with this. We want to make sure that we have the right devices. And this comes from another one of our experts. Lloyd Halverson is a senior consultant at Comstrat that we have worked with on a number of municipal deployments, deploying entire cities. So Lloyd came to us and said, hey, look, my biggest tip on cloud migration is to make sure that you know if your users actually need physical phones or you're just giving them to them because that's what they've always had. Because you could do desktop or mobile clients and serve their needs just as well or better. So let's take a moment and look at what Lloyd's talking about as far as a decision. So you should be thinking about and asking the question in your discovering real requirements, what kind of device does each user really need? Do they need a phone? Do they just need a mobile client? Do they need their PC to be enabled? Do they need multiple of these? What really fits their business profile the best? So why would you use a phone? Well, one of the advantages of a phone is if you have somebody who's talking on the phone all day long, it's a dedicated voice device. You're not going to find better audio because all it does is audio. That's what it's there for. So it's going to have the best voice quality. And one of those key things is it's not going to have any interactions with other software that could cause problems. You're not going to have any difficulties in that way. And one of the reasons I particularly bring that up is because you can see with other applications when you start putting stuff on your mobile or your PC that maybe something kills the audio, maybe something interferes with the software so it can't operate properly, and all of a sudden you have issues just because you're multitasking on that device. A phone is a phone is a phone. That's all it does. And so when you have high volume users who all they're doing is talking on the phone today, either in a contact center or maybe that's just part of their job, then a phone makes a lot of sense. Another key is you may have people who are just more comfortable using this. They really want the phone. That is what they're comfortable interacting with. So it makes a lot of sense to give them that there. But there are other users where that might not be the case. Almost every single one of us, in fact, I would bet every person on this call has a mobile device next to them or in their pocket right now. And they're used to using it for voice. It's optimized for that. It's going to provide great call quality as well because it's designed for that. And it's going to provide something that phone doesn't, which is mobility. If you have somebody who's on the go, who's out and about, which none of us have been for the last year or so, right? But if you are having somebody who's on the road, then mobility becomes a very important factor. So it may make more sense for them to do mobile connectivity. They'll also have more app capabilities with this. They'll go beyond voice, and now they can do video, they can do chatting, they can access all those different pieces that we talked about that we don't want to have in different applications all in one place. And the great part is this shouldn't be an additional cost. Your vendor shouldn't be telling your cloud provider shouldn't be saying, oh yeah, hey, if you want a mobile client, then we're going to charge you more and you're going to have this best version. It's 2021, folks. A unified communication solution should provide you all three of these at no additional cost beyond the hardware of the phone. And then the same thing sort of for the PC. Maybe you have somebody who really, they just don't talk as much on the phone, but they need one occasionally. They're sitting at a desk all day, but maybe they don't really need that phone at all. Another advantage is a larger screen for better interaction and also interacting with other applications. What I mean by that is, for example, bringing up CRM or other applications when a call comes in, so you can really have fusion of all your data as you're talking to people. And once again, there should be no additional cost for this. But the real tip here is to take these concepts and figure out, hey, does everybody need a phone? Do I just need some people with mobile? Maybe I need some people with mobile and PC. They've got a couple options. Maybe some people do need all three. What do I really need to set up? And remember we talked about Wi-Fi earlier? Well, here's the time we'll finally talk about Wi-Fi for phones. It is possible to do this, especially if you have people working at home. You can still provide them a hard phone. You just need what's called a Wi-Fi dongle. These can be very low-cost devices that just plug in to the phone and to a USB port. And then if it's a good phone, quality phone, it will have a wizard that will just start up and allow you to program it, put in the Wi-Fi information, choose the network, just like you would with, say, your smartphone, and it will be up and running on the network. Now, you're still going to have to power the phone, so this is where you're going to make sure you have to have a power brick that plugs into the wall, because you don't have PoE in this circumstance. Nobody's come up with PoE over Wi-Fi yet. And this can be especially useful for home workers, because most of your home workers probably have no idea if there's an Ethernet port in their house. They have no idea if they can hook something up, and probably their home router, which is provided by their cable company or something similar, is something they don't know much about and is sitting in the opposite side of their building from where their home office is. So Wi-Fi is going to be particularly useful for those home workers. And this is a way to give them a physical phone by using a Wi-Fi dongle like this. So this is something to ask about to see if you've got this option. And this can also work in an office where you have a location that doesn't have that network drop earlier. You can plug a Wi-Fi dongle into the phone and use the phone just this way, as long as you provide it power. That's a real option to do. But if you're going to go with the smartphone or the PC soft phone, then you need to make sure that you're providing headsets to your staff. Don't let them bring their own, because this provides a massive difference in call quality. That call quality difference is absolutely huge and has real impact on your business. Because if you have problems, if you have people whose voice is dropping, they're not connecting correctly, the mic is muffled, or there's bad noise on it, then you can run into the situation where you have a huge impact on your customer experience. You can have longer calls because people can't understand what's going on and they keep having to repeat what they're saying. You can have increased employee frustration where they're just upset because people can't understand them and nobody likes that. And this can reduce employee focus because they're distracted by trying to fix their headset instead of dealing with their customer. So you want to go ahead and make sure and provide a quality headset. And that depends upon what you're doing otherwise. Is it with your smartphone, is it with your PC, even with your, with a hard desk phone, there are headsets that you can use, and your vendor should be able to provide that advice. Vertical can certainly advise you on the best headsets to use depending upon the situation. But don't leave it to, hey, you've got an at-home worker, you just use whatever you got. That's a choice that's going to lead to a terrible customer experience and is going to lead to continuing problems. So we figured out what device, we figured out what our requirements are, we've checked our network out. Let's try and make sure we've got a worry-free cutover going on, that our cutover goes well. The very first thing that I'll tell you to make sure that this is to understand that your entire project timeline is going to be driven by your phone numbers. Because if you're migrating here, we're not starting a new business where it's easy and we can get your phone numbers for you up and running in no time. Moving your phone numbers from the old service to the new service is going to drive everything about your timeline. And this can take 30 to 90 days. It can take quite a bit of time. It is going to drive when the whole process occurs. So understand this up front. When your vendor tells you, hey, look, this is going to take a long time, it's not because of them necessarily. It's probably because of these kind of issues. So you've got to understand this drives it. Now, one of the things you can do is you could make the port faster, or you can have the port happen later and forward phone numbers for a time period. Sometimes there's an additional cost, but if you need to move quicker, there are options. You should ask about that. The other thing that's going to make a cutover that you should know about is what I call the 3 Ps: your project manager, your project plan, and your project team. These are absolutely crucial to your success. Are they going to make this or break this for you? So here's an idea of what a standard project process looks like. Your professional project manager, what we call, ideally you have what's called a PMP certified project manager, will use a process like this to make sure that every step of the way is documented, that you're getting what you want, that those requirements are met, that it's built, you understand what the time frame is, everything is taken care of. And to be honest, this is a really simplified sales version of this. The actual version of this goes on for pages because the detail level is incredible. If you have a vendor who's not offering you a detailed project plan with a professional project manager dedicated to your purpose, I would run away really quickly. These are important things. These are the things that are going to make that worry-free cutover happen for you, is to have these pieces. If you're not seeing it, run away quickly. The other piece is the solution engineer. The solution engineer is going to start with you in the sales process, and in the vertical methodology is going to live with you all the way until your project is complete. They're going to be your advocate who's going to answer questions, who's going to tell you what's going on, who's going to be able to say, oh yeah, Steve, I remember that this was set up that way. Let's make sure we get that installed, because they're going to have been there from day one to the final day. And in our process, they're involved in the whole process. They team with the technicians and the project manager to make sure that you're successful. That's the way it should be, because that's what's going to lead you to complete success. Another key thing that will lead to a worry-free cutover is putting training in the right place. This is a tough question. It always has been. If you do training early, end users are going to forget what you trained them about. They're going to be gone really quickly, and it's going to bleed out their ear, and they're not going to remember. Or if you train after, end users aren't going to be prepared for the cut. They're going to be stressed and freaked out. I've actually had people demand we do this a couple times, and it never ends well. So what you're left with is to try and train at the same time you're doing everything else. The cut happens, and there's many things going on to make sure they all work. You're depending on, having everybody show up to the class. This is really, really difficult. But cloud brings a new way to do this. With cloud, it's very easy to install the product early. So end users can have their phone, can have their software ahead of time. Then you can do training early, and instead of having it all bleed out their ear like I talked about, they can immediately go back to their desk. Their phone is sitting there. Their software is loaded. They can now take the things they learned in training and play with them and use them and become familiar, which leads to, at cutover time, they're familiar and comfortable. They're not stressed out. It's not a new thing that they don't understand, that they just had training on. It's something that they're used to, and the cut process becomes much more simpler. The other value of taking this approach is that you can then test everything ahead of time. You can make inbound and outbound calls and make sure they work using temporary numbers. You can check the call flows and make sure that calls are going to the right place, that if you have messages, you can hear what they are and press 1 and press 2 when they all go the right thing. You can test all that out. You can certify that the mobile and desktop apps work. If you have a contact center, you can do test runs where your agents can make sure they understand what they're doing. And you can check to make sure that that Wi-Fi, which I talked about being a problem, actually works. You can validate your entire network and call quality, and everything all works. And the great part of this is it means that the actual cutover will be boring. You'll just be sitting there going, oh, look, hey, the number's ported over. Yeah, everybody knows to use the new phones. Yeah, they're used to them. Hey, they still work. That's great. And you can have a boring day. And isn't that what we always want? A boring day when you're dealing with technology change? This is the most wonderful thing. And we see it in action. We see it all the time, that we actually get to the cut and it's a non-event because we've done everything ahead of time. That's one of those advantages of cloud that you should definitely take advantage of. You should be doing it all ahead of time. So great, we cut over, we have the system. The next thing to worry about is keeping everything secure. In this day and age of ransomware, leaks, software exploits, you need to be thinking about how you do this. And one of those key things about this is you can understand that defense and security isn't always what you think it is. I'm a former Army guy, if you can't tell from this slide. And these guys are building what we consider the best way to protect a defensive emplacement possible, which is what's called triple-strand concertina wire. It's basically a piece of wire with a bunch of razor blades on it, with 3-meter high and 4-meter deep sets of rolls of wire all built up so that nobody can walk through it, nobody can get through it at all. And you think, well, that's great. I can leave that and I can feel secure. But of course, if you don't have people watching over it, it's not actually security at all. Because we've developed a long time ago a really simple way to deal with triple-strand concertina wire, which is one poor soul jumps on the wire, flattens it all, gets a bunch of cuts on him, and everybody else runs over his back. And there's no actual security at all. This is the way that security works. It requires active effort. You have to have people watching your defenses. You have to have things being observed and maintained. You have to have active work. It really boils down to, in the software world, security not being a feature. You hear people talk about encryption and SRTP. Oh, we've got password policies, data center you can't get into, and security standards. These are all features. Security isn't a feature. Security is a process. Security is, oh, here's the policies that we follow, and here's how we review and make sure it works. Security is penetration testing when we put out new software to make sure it works. And so people are real-time monitoring what's going on and constantly updating and changing the software so the defenses change all the time. Security is active. And so this is what you should be looking for. You need to make sure that your cloud vendor shows you the dedicated security team whose only job is working on security, who's monitoring all this and providing you those capabilities. somebody who's got a quick turnaround when any threat occurs. They get out a software update quickly. They can identify new threats and come up with a solution and a remediation, and they're notifying you. Somebody who is doing continuous penetration testing. They have what's called a red team, who is constantly trying out ways of getting in so they know about the threats before they even occur. And that's feeding back to that dedicated security team. And all of this is put together in published security documents that you as the end customer ought to be able to ask for. Now, you might have to sign an NDA to get access to them, but you ought to be able to get those so that you can know what's going on and what their security process is. And all of this needs to be reviewed. You can talk about certifications all you want. People love to say, oh, I've got ISO or PCI, I have HIPAA certification or FISMA. These are all great things. But a HIPAA certification from 5 years ago doesn't help you today. This certification needs to be active as well. It needs to be ongoing. It needs to be updated and continuously changed to have relevance. All of this is part of as a service. When we talk about unified communication or contact center as a service, it means you get active service taking care of you. And you need to make sure that's there on whatever cloud solution you choose. So service is so important. Let's talk about the service piece, because once you've done all this, you've got the solution, it's in place, it's secure, you've got it for all time. The ongoing service is what you're going to have to live with. And this can lead to some problems. Because you see, service is a cost center for cloud providers. It's something they have to provide, but they're not making any money off of it. They're making money off of providing you the service itself. This is just costing them money. So they're not going to do the best job possible here, to be completely honest. What you need is a value-added reseller that adds value through their service. That's what Vertical is. That's why I'm suggesting this to you, to be completely honest. But there is real value in what we do. We can provide both local on-site support as well as live remote assistance, somebody to fix the problems whenever you have it. We provide that professional project management that I talked about earlier, and the solution engineers. We provide ongoing service that you can get to at any moment. And this is why we get awards for our customer service and awards for the ability we do. This is the kind of person that you want, not just somebody who sees all of this as a cost center that's trying to provide you self-service resources so you don't talk to anybody. So what does that really, Kevin? What does that mean? What should I be looking for? You should be looking for the training and background experience of the team that's going to service you over a long time. You want to make sure that that team is going to be able to provide you, as part of the standard service, moves, adds, and changes. In other words, if you need to add a new user, or you need to move somebody's phone, or you need to change or turn on a feature, that's just included. That should be a standard part of the service. You need to look at somebody who can provide you both on-site support and remote support, both whenever you need it. You need to look at all of this being backed up by a services SLA with a service level agreement. And you need to have an escalation process when this doesn't go right, so that you can go up the tree and ask somebody for help. With Vertical, when you become a Vertical customer, we give you the information for not only who you can call as our manager of support, but our VP of operations, on up to the president of our company's cell phone. So, because if we don't do it right, that's not the value that we're supposed to be bringing. We are a value-added reseller, and service is the value we bring to you. So let's finish up by talking about failure, something nobody ever likes to talk about. But this comes from yet another one of our experts. Eric Koffenbaugh is one of those great solution engineers I've talked about a couple times on our team. He's been with us for years. And his suggestion was that cloud solutions people think of as being, oh, it's in the cloud, the infrastructure is redundant and resilient, it's great and everything. But even with that, you've got to have planning for what happens when something goes wrong. If you don't, you're not going to be ready. You're not going to know how to deal with it. So you need to make sure and plan for this. So you do that by having a disaster plan. Well, cloud solutions have all these different ways of helping you. You've got to figure out how you want to use them. Determine what your preferred solutions are, what works for you, and how you want to operate in a failure. Do you want to move everybody home, as we've done in so many of us in the last year? Do you have alternate sites? What do you do in a failure situation? And use that to develop your disaster plan using the great capabilities you can have from a cloud solution. But don't expect that to never cause a disaster, because you can still have one. But the key thing here isn't developing the plan. That's the easy part. The hard part is developing the test plan. As good old Ronnie Reagan says, you need to trust, but you've got to verify everything all the time. If you don't test your disaster plan, you don't have a plan. So build a test plan around it and test regularly. And the value of this is you can make sure that you know and feel comfortable that if there is an issue, you have steps that work. And if something goes wrong, or if the system changes, you can update that plan and change it because you know it, because you've got the test plan. And even better, it makes sure that the key people are familiar with the steps. So when the freak out of, oh my gosh, there's a problem, this doesn't work, or something's gone wrong happens, they are still comfortable because they've tested and they've done this regularly. It's practice, basically. So let me give you just a couple quick examples of what I talk about. Say you're worried about end user internet outages. You're worried about their outage at their home or at your office. The simple answer is regularly try a test where you unplug the internet. You can validate that you're using call forwarding to go to another location. And if that rings through, the other person's able to get it. You could test this on a monthly basis with an individual user and say, okay, Bob, this is your test. Go unplug your phone. We're going to do a call and make sure it works. Do you know how to make an outbound call if you've lost your internet? And that way they can feel comfortable with it. Another example would be an entire facilities failure. For example, back many years ago, I was running a company in Louisville, Kentucky, and our next door neighbor was a chemical processor. And so they had an ammonia spill. Well, I had to move all of my people out of the office. In that circumstance, you lose everybody quickly, much like we saw last year. You need to make sure that your people can quickly, for example, use the mobile client to continue taking and making calls. Make sure that they test it, make sure they all use it, do calls in and out. Maybe your entire contact center works this way, and make sure that it works. And that will make sure everybody is comfortable, because regular testing will make people comfortable, make sure it works, and will give you a real successful solution. All right. I hope I've beaten into you the idea that disaster planning is really important, but more importantly, that testing that disaster is important, because we're going to move on to the final category here. Which are your thoughts? We want to hear what kind of questions. Is there something that I didn't address that you want to ask about? Is there something you want clarification on, or some thought you'd like to share? So remember, you can go to the bar at the bottom of the page and click on that meeting chat, and it will pop up a window and you can enter your question there and we can go through those. So it doesn't look like we have any questions yet, but I'll give everybody a moment. If you've been having a thought here, hopefully I haven't put everybody to sleep here. There's been, some thought about what you're looking for and what's helping. Is there anything about the cloud migration process that you were wondering about that I did not cover today? Well, that's a great comment. I'm glad that this was better than what you expected. I hope this is helpful, and we're going to see in more that there's a lot more information to get to in just a minute. But I want to make sure we do take the time to give everyone here a chance if they have questions, if they have concerns or possibilities. Well, if you do have questions, you do have concerns, that's no problem at all. We've got all this topic material. We'll get a recording out. You can look and review this again. But if you have other things that you think of or you want help right now, you can go ahead and contact your vertical account manager to help you with migrating to cloud. If you don't have a vertical account manager yet, then just contact me directly at vmarketing@vertical.com, and I'll get you talking with a vertical expert who can answer your questions, who can help you and start you on the cloud migration process as soon as possible. So once again, that's vmarketing@vertical.com. And if you're not ready to talk to someone yet, we've got even more. So you can go to vertical.com, and under resources, you'll find two great sources of resources. You can find recordings of webinars like this, and many of the topics I talked about here today, we go into much deeper process with these topics. We get into the details of it in in much greater detail, because I've had to try and fit this all into 1 hour. You can also see a lot of this covered in our blog at the same place. You'll see the URLs at the screen here for either one of them, but you can just get them by vertical.com resources. And if you have other questions, the vertical.com page is oriented at letting you put in a question and get an answer. So I hope this has been useful for you today. I hope all of this information is useful, and don't hesitate to reach out again Like I said, vmarketing@vertical.com if you don't already have a vertical contact. Thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it, and have a nice day.